Hello and welcome to this talk about A-level history. I'm Mr. Carr, the curriculum leader of history. So if you're thinking about doing A-level history, that's hopefully because you've already enjoyed GCSE history and can see the value in looking at the world as it was to help us to understand the world as it is today. I'll just explain a bit more about what we study and why I think it's important to take history to the next level with A-levels. So the course is split really into two halves. The first half will dig deeper into what you covered at GCSE with Weimar and Nazi Germany. And it is emphasis on digging deeper. It's about looking at all of the events that you may already know about, but looking for the real detail there, really understanding the more minor figures. So rather than talking about Hitler all of the time, we might speak a lot more about the people around him. We might speak in much more detail about the other politicians in the 1920s. So similar to GCSE, this part of the A-level runs from the establishment of the Weimar Republic, so we'll make sure that we understand how the Republic was set up, how its constitution functioned, how the political parties functioned and the big broad coalitions that they formed. We'll look at detail at the economic problems that they faced and their attempts to solve them. We'll look at social conditions, and really you can see I'm getting at the point that we dig much deeper. Just as GCSE, we'll look at Nazi Germany, so we'll look at Hitler in particular. How does he manage to manipulate the situation that he finds himself in, ultimately to take power? And we'll look at the methods and establishment of the Nazi dictatorship. Lots and lots of extra detail on top of the GCSEs, and there's also more emphasis on using evidence. So we use sources. We will learn to really pull them apart and analyse them in depth to look at their content, their argument, the tone of the source, where it comes from, its origins, its provenance, and then to make decisions about how useful those are to historians, or at A-level we would talk about how valuable they are. The second part of the course, which would be taught by a different teacher, would be Tudor England. And this one is broader than what you studied at GCSE. This is the breadth side. So Tudors, not just Elizabeth. We go right from the establishment of the Tudor dynasty with Henry VII, just after the Battle of Bosworth, which ended the War of the Roses. We talk about how he established that Tudor dynasty and how actually quite early on that wasn't clear that the dynasty would survive, that perhaps he wouldn't manage to pass on power to his son. We talk about how by the end of his reign he had effectively taken power of England, how the nobles were following him, and ultimately he was successful in passing on power to his heir, who is of course Henry VIII. We talk about the big issues for Henry VIII, of course his personality. His character is very different to his father. We talk about the divorce that you will know from study lower down the school, but we'll talk about how he achieved that divorce and why that was very difficult for him to do. The Catholic Church being very against it, and he had to break away from Rome to do that. From Henry VII, we talk about what then is known as the mid-Tudor crisis. So he passed power on to his son, Edward VI. Short-lived reign followed by Mary, Bloody Mary, who turns England back to Catholic, and then into Elizabeth. And we study Elizabeth's whole reign rather than just up to 1588 as you did at A-level. This time, instead of looking at sources of evidence, the emphasis is on looking at interpretations. So we look at what historians have said about the Tudors and we compare them to decide which is most convincing, which do we believe. So we would read an interpretation and try to work out, well, how can I support this? How can I find evidence to say, yes, this historian is on the right lines, I agree with this part, but then what other evidence is there to perhaps contradict that? The idea is that ultimately you can say how convincing it is and perhaps begin to suggest your own interpretation as well. So we become much more interested in the historians on the Tudor side. The third part of your A-level is a piece of coursework. It's the NEA, the non-examined assessment. This is a piece of coursework where you have much more independence. We will suggest a title to you, and this is something that you will research. It needs to be quite broad. It needs to cover a 100-year period of history where you look at the sources and find sources for yourself. You evaluate them yourself. You look for historians with contradictory opinions and you compare those. And you ultimately write up a large essay. Your assessment will end up being about 3,500 words of really independent study of your own. And this is a really useful thing for preparing for university level study, where it is much more independent. And that takes me on to why A-level history is so valuable and why it's so useful. It has all the same attributes as GCSE, but this time we really are refining the skills, especially the critical thinking, especially the digging into the evidence, especially the looking at things that contradict each other and comparing them. We think lots and lots about provenance. We think about how do people end up with different interpretations? Why does this source disagree with that source? So we're really refining the skills, and of course the content has increased. If you go on to further study at university, whether it's history or anything else, then those skills are invaluable for organising big pieces of information that often disagree with each other. We'll sharpen our skills in debate much more than we did at GCSE, so class discussion will be a really important part of A-level lessons. And it prepares you for the challenges, the academic rigour that you might face at university. It's a highly respected course in that regard, so if you were to apply for university or further education, then a history A-level stands you in very good stead for that. If you're not thinking of further education, then history is very valued by employers as well because of the historian's abilities to communicate very clearly, to weigh up evidence and to report very clearly. If you have any further questions about studying A-level history, then please do speak to your current GCSE teacher, or you can come and find me, Mr. Carr, and we'll be very happy to explain more to you about the course and its benefits. Thank you.